When it comes to Chile as a footballing nation, not too many people pay attention to it outside of South America. Aside from the occasional World Cup appearance, most will know of them due to star players such as Alexis Sanchez and Arturo Vidal. As it happens, both of these players have something in common. They have both played for Colo Colo. And it is Colo Colo who will be our focus today. However, it won't be due to their footballing ability. Instead, it will be based on their hooligan element, which takes place off the pitch. Despite being the most successful Chilean football team of all time, with 34 Primera Division titles, Colo Colo is just as well known domestically for their hooliganism. As you can imagine, this is some feat, and would be the footballing equivalent of Real Madrid, associated with having the most violent and powerful hooligan group in Spain, which at times has completely blindsided their accomplishments on the pitch. Because of this, it's easy to understand why Colo Colo has such a negative reputation among other Chilean football fans. This isn't helped due to their on-field success, but regardless, it's their fans who have caused hatred from others in the country. Although they're not alone when causing trouble, it's widely agreed that Colo Colo's hooligans are by far the worst in the country and would be comparable with Millwall by English standards. Chilean hooliganism has a fairly unique flavour, which blends street violence with crime, money, and politics. To an outsider, you may be completely oblivious as to how the Chilean hooligan system works, which differs greatly compared to most firms around the world. And if you keep watching, then you'll find out just how crazy the Garra Blanca truly are. Garra Blanca, which means White Claw in Spanish, was founded in 1986 as part of a youth movement amongst supporters of Colo Colo, drawing inspiration from European football hooligan culture, which was becoming more prominent at the time. Amongst wider Chilean football culture, the term Barras Bravas is often used to describe football hooligans, which initially took inspiration from Europe and more specifically English firms. The Garra Blanca originated during the infamous military dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet, where the group attracted members from marginalized communities across Chile who sought a sense of identity and belonging. This isn't surprising, as Pinochet's rule was brutal, which would have pushed people into seeking an identity in something fairly innocent such as football. Over the years, Garra Blanca has gained a reputation for its involvement in repeated incidents of violence, including confrontations with stadium security, the Chilean National Police, and rival Barras Bravas groups. Somewhat unsurprisingly, Garra Blanca has also been the source of various deaths as well due to their wild reputation. And for Westerners watching this video, Chilean police are not the type of people you want to get on the wrong side of. This means that Garra Blanca ultras are either brave, stupid, or perhaps a mixture of both. As we shall explore later, things aren't this simple, and there is a strong argument to be made that Garra Blanca hooligans are more powerful than you first may expect. In short, their status with the police is somewhat elevated compared to typical matchday fans. Here there is a strange contradiction. Whilst the Chilean police actively carry firearms and carry a sense of strong authority, there have been numerous times where they have folded due to the infamous White Claw. Having said this, it isn't just the police who Garra Blanca aim their aggression against. Naturally, it's their Santiago rivals who bear the brunt of their vitriol. As you may expect, this rivalry goes back generations and began in the 1920s with the formation of the clubs, and is often the case with football rivalries. Once again, it's based on culture and class. If you haven't already figured out, Universidad de Chile naturally attracted more middle-class audience, originating from the university of the same name. For reference, the Universidad fan group is known best as the Los de Abajo, known as the ones below. In comparison, Colo Colo attracted more working class fans as it was not founded by a university. In fact, the very name Colo Colo has aggressive connotations, as it's named after a legendary Chilean chieftain who fought against the colonial Spaniards in the 16th century Arauco War. You could say it was almost written in the stars that a club with this name would go on to be involved with wars of their own on the streets of Santiago. Unsurprisingly then, Garra Blanca is mostly viewed as being aligned with the left of the political spectrum. In terms of its structure, rather than functioning as a single unified body, it's made up of multiple internal factions, but its prevailing identity is shaped by working class origins, anti-fascism, and an anti-capitalist ideology, at least most of the time. Known as the Super Clásico, the fixture against Universidad often attracts all the chaos that you'd expect with a South American local derby. At one point, this even led to the War of the Banners. This name comes from lienzos culture in South America, which is Spanish for canvas. Specifically, ultras of both teams would hold up huge flags during games, displaying their loyalty. Unfortunately, what started out as a display of loyalty ultimately led to street violence. Here, Colo Colo's Garra Blanca stole a huge banner belonging to Los de Abajo and tauntingly displayed it upside down during a Super Clásico. What may be considered as fan banter in many countries didn't go down well. In retaliation, the theft resulted in extreme violence in surrounding neighborhoods of Santiago. Factions, like the Bomber Azul, a radical wing of Los de Abajo, patrolled the capital looking for vengeance, leading to drive-by shootings, arson, and even the murder of rival members. Universidad fans aren't the only victims of this either, with White Claw members once proudly hanging the flags of Boca Juniors upside down. Upon having their banner stolen, Boca fans' buses had their windows smashed while still in Santiago, which shows that even foreign teams aren't safe. Interestingly, flag wars aren't new to the world of football hooliganism, with similar rivalries being experienced in other South American countries as well as Russia. Here, rival teams' banners are often stolen and hung upside down at games as a display of mockery and dominance. Fortunately for international fans, Garra Blanca don't really get involved with the national team. As a result, you won't really hear about them in any international games, as they don't cause trouble abroad. There is a reason for this, however, and it's not just due to the loyalty to their club. To comprehend this, you need to understand the general culture with the ultras, which is tied in with local crime, rather than trying to point score against international countries. What further makes Garra Blanca and similar Chilean hooligan groups unique compared to those abroad is the blend with gang culture. Typically, many ultra groups mostly enjoy football violence, which ends away from the club, or they're certainly not as closely tied to street crime as the White Claw. Unlike foreign firms, certain members of Garra Blanca are genuine gangsters who take pistols to games. It may surprise you that this isn't just for intimidation. In early 2026, one fan died and another was injured following a fatal shooting in Santiago during a clash against the Universidad de Chile supporters. Although this may cause outcry if it took place in mainland Europe, it just shows how casual death and violence is in Chilean football. Where there is money, gangsters and violence follow. As for the Garra Blanca, like many Chilean Barras Bravas groups, they have supposedly infiltrated their club at the highest level. Barras Bravas may even extort clubs to gain free tickets, deal drugs in local areas, take money from players, or monopolize local car parking spaces near the ground. On the subject of narcotics, we're not just talking about small-time dealing amongst friends either, with claims of widespread drug and weapons smuggling in and out of Santiago. One subgroup, aptly named the Testables, has even been accused as a front for the aforementioned. And on a logical level, this makes perfect sense. No one expects a football group to be involved in underworld activities. Naturally, this has led to the national police looking into such crimes, with local leaders supposedly using social activities and charitable giving as a way to help justify and get away with criminal activities similar to Pablo Escobar's charity washing in Colombia during the 1980s. Perhaps most ironically, General Pinochet's biggest legacy was that he hated drugs and stopped Chile from turning into Colombia during his time in power. Nonetheless, years later, it looks as though his authoritarian methods may have been in vain, with even hooligan groups getting in on the lucrative business. Once again, this highlights the difference between Chilean hooligan firms and English ones, who are politically powerless in comparison. In fact, whilst most English hooligans are barely active in the modern era, it looks as though Chilean hooliganism is thriving in terms of violence and earning money from crimes. In similar displays of power being exercised on the pitch, Garra Blanca fans have had games called off completely due to their demands. In 2025, officials tried to get their Super Classico fixture moved out of Santiago due to crowd trouble. Using a banner, Garra Blanca claimed the game would get cancelled if these plans proceeded. Months later, a date still wasn't announced, which shows Chilean football authorities have less power than the hooligan Barras Bravas groups. In fact, some allegations even go all the way to the top, with powerful judges supposedly having relationships with Barras Bravas members. Sometimes though, Garra Blanca hooligans aren't always as diplomatic. 5 years earlier, Colo Colo trailed 2-0 against Universidad Católica, when members of La Garra Blanca forced the match to be abandoned. Here, they fired volleys of fireworks onto the pitch, with one projectile injuring a Colo Colo player. The match was subsequently cancelled. Further still, some local fans have claimed that Garra Blanca and similar groups act more like a well-connected mafia than a fan club. Although this has never been confirmed, it does make you wonder if they have ever used the power to suspend games. Clearly, not all fans are equal, and some hold enormous levels of power and influence within the game of football. In other words, you could argue that many hooligans are an extension of street criminals who have adopted a local football club, rather than just being hooligans on match days. Of course, Garra Blanca still have many similarities with other football firms, such as using flares, concealing their identities, and having club symbols and tattoos covering their bodies. Nonetheless, this power dynamic and ultra-violence seems to be fairly unique to Chilean football. So why are they allowed to run riot compared to foreign ultras groups? As ever, this is linked to the local political culture. La Garra Blanca emerged in the mid-80s. It wasn't just Pinochet who caused a stir. Simultaneously, hooligan groups naturally emerged during a period when both the Catholic Church and political parties were retreating from working-class neighborhoods. Street gangs then stepped into that vacuum with a kind of imitation of religion and politics, offering a sense of community and shared identity. This was expressed through rituals and flags, colours and anthems, as well as heroes and martyrs. And in the mid-80s, it seems as many of these street thugs turned to football as a way to conceal their criminalities behind teams such as Colo Colo. In other words, these hooligans were involved with crime and violence long before football came along. As a result, local politicians were often hand in hand with the street gangs. Here, thugs could act as muscle, which explains how they got connected to powerful individuals further down the line. Think this is just a conspiracy theory? In 2025, Chilean sports journalist Juan Cristobal Guerrero wrote an article directly linking the Garra Blanca and the mayor of Macul. Within the article, the mayor literally went on to say, "All Colo Colo fans, the Garra Blanca, those from the Macul branch, can support me with their families, with their people, and we can, on October 26th and 27th, hug each other like Colo Colo fans hug each other for weeks and weeks." Notice that the mayor didn't just reference Colo Colo fans, he specifically separately mentioned the Garra Blanca too and called for their support. Reading between the lines, you may be able to figure out what was meant by this symbolic call to arms. Remember earlier we mentioned how the White Claw seemed to be almost immune from the police? Well, the previous speech may go a long way in explaining how things work in Chile. As is often the case with Barra Brava groups, it's not always black and white. According to some, there are sometimes internal power struggles from within, where factions of La Garra Blanca fight between themselves to gain control. Although shrouded in mystery, some online forums discussing Colo Colo have even had past whispers that prominent left-wing members of La Garra Blanca have hung out with those on the far right. This shows that sometimes, where power is concerned, boundaries can be blurred and ideologies take a backseat whilst people make alliances to keep control. Underneath these arrangements, you can often find an undertone of violence to keep the status quo. And violence has always been a way of life for Garra Blanca. Going back to their earlier days in 1990, Danilo Rodriguez, a 17-year-old haemophiliac, was brutally beaten by Garra Blanca members for wearing a Union Espanola shirt. Even by global hooligan standards, this is brutal and gives a taste of what Chilean hooliganism can sometimes be like. And as often the case in South America, some crimes never even get reported, which means fan violence is arguably even worse than you may first imagine or the statistics show. Stepping forward to present day, Colo Colo's tragedies have continued. In 2025, against Brazilian side Fortaleza, 2 teenage fans, aged 13 and 18, both died. This took place outside the ground with hundreds of fans trying to force entry into the Monumental Stadium against police forces, which led to the pair being crushed to death. In true Colo Colo fashion, this led to a protest, which sparked pitch invasions during the game. In the 70th minute the game was abandoned. Colo Colo were fined $80,000 and given a 5-game stadium ban. Perhaps more interestingly was the fallout and the change in policy from the Chilean government. Historically, before this, a safe stadium plan was in place to stop such instances happening. This involved hard policing and a hands-on approach which has since been dropped. Instead, the Chilean authorities are now trying a softer approach, working on changing the ideology of attendees to make fans less aggressive. Whether this new plan works remains to be seen. With that being said, a cynic may argue so long as Garra Blanca and similar groups have a hold on internal matters, then tackling stadium safety will be near impossible to achieve. If the root cause isn't solved, then it looks as though it could be a PR talk from the government to look like they're actually taking action against a force they simply can't defeat. In short, it's fair to say that La Garra Blanca isn't your ordinary hooligan group. While they do share similarities with other hooligan groups based around violence, ultimately that's where it ends. Even infamous firms from the likes of Russia look fairly tame compared to the level of violence and political influence involved with Garra Blanca. So where does it all end? Despite Chile having a typically low profile within the international football scene, it clearly has its fair share of big problems. Many foreign fans may be quick to think of a local powerhouse such as Argentina and Brazil when it comes to South American football, but when it comes to ultras and hooligan culture, you could argue that Chile is vastly underrepresented within the continent. Unfortunately, it seems as though this problem is very much a localized one which is barely known on the global stage. Based on this, it looks like there won't be any external pressure to oust the Garra Blanca anytime soon. Not only this, but if history's anything to go by, the clubs themselves and authorities are far too entangled with Barra Brava groups. Unless there's some kind of sweeping revolution, it looks as though it would simply be business as usual. And although the change in safe stadiums rule may bring about some positive change, you could argue that Garra Blanca are simply too strong, too culturally ingrained, and too politically powerful for any meaningful change to happen. As previously mentioned, where there is money, crime follows, and with the potential support of local politicians and the ability to earn from local match days, why would Garra Blanca go away? In a country where hooligan groups bizarrely yield more power than local police or national agencies, this shows something is seriously wrong and mirrors Chilean society in general and isn't just exclusive to football. In Chile, crime and corruption work together and ruin everything for normal people. Perhaps one of the most frustrating things about the Chilean system is that it's incredibly difficult to prove these connections to be true in a court of law. Throughout the video, there's been concrete evidence of death and crime linked to Garra Blanca, and although it's certainly true, the cries of corrupt politicians, judges, and widespread drug dealing are near impossible to piece together and connect. In fact, there's even a counter-argument to be made that some of these theories are exactly that, just theories. So it's one thing to be aware of potential problems in your country, but proving them and solving them is a completely different thing altogether. Rather eerily, the Chilean national anthem of Por la razón o la fuerza, by reason or by force, is not lost on Garra Blanca and its hold on the public. Sadly, this means that for ordinary match-going Colo Colo fans and those supporting other teams, it looks as though Garra Blanca and similar hooligans are here to stay, and with recent reports of death and criminality, it looks like it could get worse before it gets better, as their grip on the Chilean game seems to match the success of Colo Colo on the pitch.